WCON 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're coming to you from Star Communications Studio, Channel 16, Star Communications, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m. replays. The show airs as live on Tuesday, 2:30 each and every Tuesday. Thank you for your comments on our show last week, and we've got a very interesting show today. Coming up here the month of April, the 1st of April, Child Abuse Awareness and Prevention Month. We have two folks with us. One you may remember, Shannon Blanchard is the Director of Child Advocacy Center here. Shannon, thank you for being with us. Thank you for coming back. Also, we have with us, and I believe, Arnitha, this is the first time on the show, Arnitha Gillis, and you are Assistant District Attorney for the 4th Prosecutorial District right here in North Carolina. Works for Ernie Lee, who is the District Attorney. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to kind of open the program today to talk a bit about child abuse, neglect, maltreatment. All of these words kind of get jumbled a bit, but Shannon, let me start with you. This is something that the last time we talked, and even before that, you have had a passion for this. And at times when we've talked about it, I could almost see a tear in your eye because it was that important to you. From 2 or 3 years ago, when this thing really started coming together, and now, where are we at, and are we making significant differences in children's lives?
We are. When we first started in 2012, it was forming a multidisciplinary team to actually review these cases about child abuse. We have now actually opened a child advocacy center where we provide forensic interviews for abused victims, and we also do medical exams and child advocacy for those victims. So we've come a long way in the 4 years that we've been working on this. It took some time, but we now actually have a center that's up and running and serving victims of Sampson County.
And so the last time we talked, there was this big concern as well that there needed to be more of these child advocacy centers throughout the state, and at the time there was just a few, and the last data, or the most recent data I could get, there's something like 76 in North Carolina now. Is that still the? There
were 77 in North Carolina when we started looking at starting ours, and so now there are 78 because Sampson County, we put ourselves on the map with those statistics. There are 100 counties here, so there really should be one in each county, and that's the goal of child advocacy centers, is to have one in each county.
Arnitha, thank you again for being with us today. One of the things that's interesting to me is that I remember my experience many years ago when I was on the street working in law enforcement. One of the most heart-rending things was child abuse and some of the horrific things that happens to children. From the prosecutorial end, what you're seeing in court, it's got to be maddening sometime when you see some of these horrific cases that's brought before you. Just kind of talk to us about that and what happens to people. I know this is not a mental health show, but it just seems to me that somebody has to go completely off the rails when you see some of these things.
A lot of times in court, what we see is a large number of sexual abuse cases. Our physical abuse numbers are relatively low, but when we do see physical abuse, a lot of times those are more serious when they get to the felony level of bruising, choking, broken bones. Those sort of things are the more serious cases that we see, but those are rare. A lot of the cases that we do see is sexual abuse, and those are some of the most difficult cases to prove.
The data that, and we talked a little bit about data before we went on air a while ago, a lot of times you pull data in and you've got to kind of validate the information and kind of understand where it's coming from. I would just toss on the table for a discussion point. Do you see an increase? I know I saw, Shannon, where we looked like in 2015 it was like 950 something reported cases or investigated cases. Are we seeing an uptick? Is it holding about the same? Where are we at on and plus the other question, part of that would be, where are we at on the information gathering? Are we getting all the child abuse information we need.
The 950 cases are the number of cases that Department of Social Services investigated in this county. That includes sex abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. The cases that the Child Advocacy Center saw in 2015 was actually 125 cases. 102 of those cases were sex abuse. The Child Advocacy Center doesn't see all the cases that DSS has because we only see children that have been severely physically abused, and as Arnitha said, those numbers are much lower. We see more sexual abuse victims. We only saw 20 severe physical abuse victims in 2015. So those numbers have increased since we first started the Child Advocacy Center. Those numbers have doubled in the amount of reported sex cases since we first started looking at, hey, we need this in Sampson County. We were seeing about 60 to 70 cases that we were aware of, but since we started the center, there's now, like I said, we've had 125 last year.
In District 4, do you guys see any relationship as far as numbers? Are the other counties represented in the 4th District, or that they have a Child Advocacy Center, or is Sampson kind of the one in the area? How many do you look at when you look at the 4th Prosecutorial District?
Duplin is served by Teddy Bear, which is in Greenville. Onslow has a CAC, and they also service Jones. They also see, Teddy Bear also see the kids in Jones County, because Jones County is a relatively small community, and we have very little child abuse cases that are reported there and sexual abuse cases, so they are covered by other counties.
Put your lawyer hat on for a minute.
Okay.
I mean, I gave you the introduction. I don't know what folks understand. You've got to go to law school to be an assistant district attorney, but put your lawyer hat on a minute. And the evidence gathering piece, how hard is it to get the evidence that you need, and what kind of evidence do you need on the prosecution side to really look after these children, make sure they're not injured again? That's always something, I know, Shannon, we've talked about how important it is with the team that you pull together to make sure that evidence is there, because really that's where you're engaged, is hopefully to make sure legally it's not going to happen, that child's protected.
Before the CAC, let me cover it was very difficult prosecuting these cases. One, you had multiple prosecutors handling this. Nobody really specialized in handling these cases, and Mr. Lee was instrumental in making sure that they had a dedicated prosecutor to be on this team. But prior to the CAC, it was very difficult to make sure kids were properly interviewed, to get the medical piece done. The cases were extremely difficult to prosecute simply because the investigation was not there like it needed to be, and nobody was really talking as a team. Since the CAC, we meet once a month, and everybody from DSS, mental health, the medical piece, the interviewer, the doctors that are doing our medical exam, we're all at the table and we're talking about these cases, and we're gathering this information to make sure that once we go to court, we have everything that we need, and we're doing this prior to charging. We even have a foster care piece. Sometimes if the child is in foster care, that person is also at the table. So they're looking at aftercare of the child, and that mental issue of the child that's being taken care of is handled by the community resources also. And just trying to come together as a community to try to put these children back together.
Shannon, it's always been from the beginning, and I think you've kind of been part of the seed of the development of this for some time, but in 2004, the legislature allocated $375,000 statewide, which is not a lot of money if you look at statewide to try to get something done. How have you progressed? Obviously, you've done something right because you've got a good team together. You've got as you just mentioned, Arnitha, there's folks meets and so forth. Where are we at on funding, and what would you speak to that if maybe if some of our legislators and commissioners are listening, which I'm sure they do, what would you say to them that we need now in this area to help you better and help the team better?
Our primary source of funding is through Governor's Crime Commission, and that is a large grant that we received that basically is what helped us get up and started. We also do local fundraising events to try to help raise money. There's things that Governor's Crime Commission will not cover. And then we also are a United Way partner with Sampson County. This is our first year being one of their partner agencies, and so they fund things such as our forensic interviewer, anything around forensic interviewing, and our medical doctor that is providing services for us. We are a one-man shop. I wear multiple hats in the Child Advocacy Center. I'm the director, I'm the forensic interviewer, I'm the child advocate, the secretary. I'm every role for that agency. We would hope to increase our funds so that we can have more people that are employed with the Child Advocacy Center to pick up and provide some of these roles, such as child advocacy. I don't have as much time to spend on that because I'm doing so much with forensic interviewing, but the child advocacy piece, that's somebody that follows that child from the time the case is initiated until the case goes to court. They prepare that child for court, for what's to come with that, and that's a very vital piece of the Child Advocacy Center. So we hope that we'll receive additional funding in the future that can help fund a full-time position for that.
Is that something that you kind of anticipate happening? Are you getting, I guess, signals that will happen?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I think part of it, Arnita, is the numbers, but the multidisciplinary team, when we say MDT, that's what we're talking about. That MDT team, those folks on that team, and to include you as Assistant District Attorney, are actually volunteered by Ernie Lee, the District Attorney here, and we'll give him a shout out for that, to be part of that to help you out to make this happen.
Yes, once a month I dedicate my whole entire day to go there. I'm also available for phone calls and those type things whenever anybody needs me. If there's an issue with the interview, they have my cell number. They can contact me anytime, and it's a big commitment. I do some of the cases I have sent people away for. I've had kids stop back by the office just to see me, to say thank you, and that feels really good.
Absolutely.
You know, because a lot of times in the job that we do, sometimes, you know, people are not as appreciative to have kids to say thank you. That means a lot.
We'll take a break. We'll come back and talk about some of the signs to look for and some of the cases that maybe you've had. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking about child abuse, prevention, neglect, all of those things that impact your lives.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. You're listening to us on WCLN 1170 Radio out of Clinton, North Carolina. Star Communications Channel 16. If you're watching us on 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are replays of these shows. There's also a summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. We encourage you to participate in one of those areas. Hopefully each one of these shows has a way to touch you and touch what's going on. And maybe you can be helpful on some of the subjects we're talking about. And today we're talking about child abuse and neglect, maltreatment, prevention, and two people that know a lot about that, Shannon Blanchard, who is the director of the Child Advocacy Center here, and Arnita Gillis, who is Assistant District Attorney for the 4th District in Ernie Lee's office. One of his many offices is in Clinton, so I want to thank you for being here. Let's get back into this, and we went to break, we were talking about a number of issues, but one of the things that always comes to mind for me is that is that child, and oftentimes depending on where you are and what you see, and I encourage people, I think maybe it's after one of our conversations, or maybe it was somebody with foster care that was in here talking to us, that have you looked in the eyes of a child, you know, and really it sounds kind of like, well, that's a little bit crazy. I mean, sure, but there's a difference. You know, Arnita, you can kind of look into a child's eyes and almost see a mirror image that there's something that's just not right. I mean, you could be in a public place, you could be at a shopping mall. I mean, we all know about the cases where, you know, the temperature is 95 degrees outside and the windows is up in the car and somebody leaves a 12-month-old baby in a car seat in the back. We see that too much. But let's talk about what do we look for, and what are some of the things that have been reported? Either one of you.
Start?
Do you start? You can start.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the things that you can look for are bruises. Those are some signs. If you see a child in a hot car, of course, that's pretty obvious. If you notice a change in the child's personality, like they used to be outgoing and fun-loving, and now they're withdrawn. And teachers are very good at noticing these things, and they're kind of our warriors on the ground, really, because most children who are in school, the person they're going to come into contact the most are our teachers, and getting them to report and just take note of that child having a change in personality is one of the biggest things, and their grades start to slip. Recently, North Carolina always had a mandatory reporting statute. Recently, it became criminal. Before, it was just you were required to report abuse that you know of, but there was no punishment to it. But now it's a misdemeanor here in North Carolina for failing to report child abuse.
Shannon, when I hear the legal end of that, a person that's in the community for whatever reason, and they call, let's talk about what happens to that call, because oftentimes I would assume the call would either go to social services, or maybe if they know your number, and I want to give out your numbers as much as we can so folks know that number. Wherever they call, whether it's a law enforcement agency, social services, or maybe even the district attorney's office, but I suspect it's social services or you guys. That call goes in, what happens? Do I say see something and I call? Do I have to say this is so-and-so and I live at a certain place and my social security number is this and my address is this? Tell us about that. Tell us what happens. Step us through that process.
Right. If somebody calls a Child Advocacy Center, I would refer them to Department of Social Services to make that report. We do not take direct reports from anybody other than law enforcement or a social worker from DSS. Okay. When someone calls Department of Social Services, there are social workers that is their job, is to strictly be available and handle an on-call emergency situation that comes in. They'll take all that information. To my knowledge, you do not have to give your contact information. You can, because they can let you know if they decided to. Right. They can send you something and let you know not what happened with the case, but that they were checking into it. But you do not have to give your information. You can call and report and be anonymous. And I think a lot of people do that because they're afraid. They don't want somebody to know that, well, this is somebody in my family. I definitely don't want them to know I made that report. We see that sometimes. Or somebody in my church, or they don't want to be retaliated against, so they don't want to call and make the report. But you can call and make that report as an anonymous reporter.
And Arnetta, when you look at that, and I know you want to touch on this too, because it's critically important that folks don't feel like, I think, that they don't feel threatened or anything if they call. So from your perspective, legally, what does that look like?
Legally, social services records are very protected, and they disclose these records for prosecution. The one thing that is protected is the reporting person's name. That is always blacked out. It is redacted from that report. So 9 times out of 10, I never know who that reporting person is. The only time that information comes to light is that if someone doesn't like the decision of the Department of Social Services and they can appeal that decision to the district attorney's office. Those are the limited circumstances where I know a reporting person. If it's a teacher or something, that's a little bit different because usually that comes through with our school resource officers. But if it's coming through the Department of Social Services hotline, that is usually kept confidential by statute.
Do you get, obviously I think you get a lot of calls or a lot of information through those SROs at the schools and teachers. Do you get a lot of calls from folks in the general population that may have seen a child? And one of the things that we've talked about on this show with other people, especially as it relates to gangs and exploiting children and slavery, situations where folks are captured. Does folks just call in and go, look, I just saw something and it looked a little bit strange, and Do you get those kinds of cases? Because I know I don't want to create hysteria in the community, but at the same time, I think we all have been at different locations, and you see something and God, that looked terrible. And what may have been somebody getting a spanking, which we want to talk about that too. What's a spanking and what's brutality? And I've had a number of communications knowing you guys were going to be on, and they said, how about explain to, get them to explain to us when we're breaking the law, Arnetha, when whether we're spanking somebody or what's going on. So what is that? Tell us what it's called and what that call means. Is it something okay if you just don't see, it just don't look right to pick up the phone and call either social services or law enforcement and say, I just saw a car and there was 8 young girls in the back, all 15, and they were in the back of a van and they threw 14 cookie boxes in there and slammed the door and drove off. Is that strange, or are they headed to the beach? How do we know the difference?
Right. I don't know how many of those reports come in that are just a random stranger that sees something. Most of the time, I would probably think that most of the reports that come in are somebody that has knowledge of the case. There definitely needs to be reports if people see things, but I think a lot of times in the community, people, it's not my problem. That's not my, they kind of turn their back on it, and that's something that we need people to step up and start doing. If you see a child being mistreated, report that. Let somebody know what you saw so it can be checked into. But I think a lot of times people probably just turn away from it.
We're so strapped now, especially when you look at social services. I mean, with everything the state requires, and social services is one of those agencies that, from what I can read and understand, it's not only got local responsibilities, but they have a huge responsibility of mandated stuff from the state. It's kind of perplexing when you think, well, here's something that's so critically important that nobody I know wants to see a child harmed or injured, but yet we don't put that much attention to it. Why is that? Oh yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one. Maybe the other groups have better lobbyists than
Good point.
than the Department of Social Services and people who care for children. That's just the reality. We don't have money. We're asking for money. And typically when the budget gets cut, they look at those easy targets because, quite frankly, we don't have the big bucks backing us or lobbying for us.
Less noise made,
Yes.
so therefore. Do you see what would be your critical need now if you had to say, my most important need right now for the Child Advocacy Center right here, what would that need be, Shannon?
We need a medical professional that we have to contract out of the county. There is nobody in this county that is certified to do these child medical exams. We need a medical professional. It would be great to have a local person step up and say, hey, I want to be a part of this and I want to do these exams for these children, because now we contract with an agency in another county, and sometimes that doctor's only here 2 days a month, and we only see 2 children a day when she's here, because when children come to the Child Advocacy Center, it's typically about a 4-hour appointment. So when she is here, it's normally just 2 children a day, and that's only 4 children a month that we sometimes can provide medical services for. So that would be the most critical need, I think, for the Child Advocacy Center today.
And we're looking, when you say that, it really resonates, because you're talking about adding to the already trauma that child has. If the child has to wait 4 hours or even a day or 2, or they're not seen for 2 weeks, and you're talking bruises, abrasions, you're talking, we hadn't even got into the psychological trauma yet. What would that person's credentials need to be? Are we talking a PA? Are we talking a nursing person? Or are we talking a certified medical doc? Or
It has to be a doctor, a certified doctor, or it can be a PA. They have to have special child abuse training, 10 hours of child abuse training a year to be able to provide these exams. They participate in the whole process for the Child Advocacy Center when the child arrives. They participate in the forensic interview. They're in another room watching, so they know what the child is saying, and then they take the child and do a medical exam on the child following that interview. That way everything is done the same day. The child doesn't have to have one piece done today and come back 3 weeks later and have another piece done. Everything's done at the same time, but when we only have 2 days, sometimes 3 days a month. Just like children that we receive referrals on today, we don't have another doctor's appointment until the middle of April.
We're going to take a quick break. I want to come back and follow up on that, and then I want to look at some of the specific types of abuse and neglect. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking about child abuse and neglect, and April is coming up, Child Abuse and Neglect Month. We'll be back in a moment.
Whether it's video, voice, internet, or cellular, Star Communications connects you to the things you love. It's what we do and have done for over 50 years. Star Communications, your local technology company.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank all these folks at the radio station that mentions our show. This is my little plug for them because they mention us, tell people to watch us on Star Communications Channel 16 or listen to us on the radio, Boogie Shoes Radio Network on Saturday afternoon. Robert Stroud, we appreciate your comment and recommendation for folks and explaining to folks what our topic's going to be for the coming week, quite frankly. The morning show with the L-Man, Nolan Z, and of course, Grandpa in the Morning on 1170, and also the Country Store, which is a very popular show with Nicole each and every day. And thanks, Nicole, for introducing this show each week. We thank her for what she does. Tommy the Fly in the afternoon, and Wayne Weeks with the Gospel Hour. We're talking with our Nita Gillis. She is an ADA, Assistant District Attorney, with Ernie Lee's office as District Attorney here in the 4th Judicial District, and Shannon Blanchard. Shannon, I always want to say you're a regular on this show, but you're the Director of the Child Advocacy Center here, and we're talking about child abuse and neglect and some of those things that that people really need to know. And we've talked a little bit about funding, and we were talking as we went off air about this issue of health care, looking at somebody to step up to be part of that MDT team, that multidisciplinary team that you guys have to help you with that. If it's a doctor that's listening to this show, listen, you know, all of us know some of our doctors in the area, and they're very dedicated, genuinely community-focused folks. I could start calling names, but I would probably insult somebody because I'd miss them. But if they're listening, what would they have to do? You said there was an annual certification of 10 hours. What would they have to do other than call you? Is that the best thing, and say, you know, I might be interested in doing this, and they might have their nurse or somebody call you and say,
Right.
Is that all they, and then you could give them the details?
Absolutely, and we could let them know when there's a training that's going to be held again in the state to train them in this, and they could even come and be a part of our center and kind of follow our doctor around and see what all that entails of being a doctor for the Child Advocacy Center. I think a lot of times, and Arnitha can probably speak on this, sometimes what scares the doctor's office court and having to go to court and testify. And I think that's why we have a hard time finding somebody to commit to it, because they feel like they may have to sit in court a lot. And Arnitha can probably speak more on that.
Tell us about the issue with that, because I can see where that would be a drawback.
Usually for the DA's office, we put the doctors and other folks on standby. These trials can last upwards to a week or a couple of days, depending on how much evidence I would have. And it would be impossible for a doctor to shut down his practice for that entire week. And so we try to limit the time that they have to be in court. And we have great legal assistants at the DA's office who coordinates with these doctors, and we get them in, and then we get them on the stand, usually 2 hours, depending on how many questions the defense team might have. But we get them in and out as soon as possible. And if it's a local doctor, it would be less travel time. A lot of times when we're dealing with the out-of-county doctors, we have to accommodate their travel time also. So it's a little bit longer, but if it's a local doctor, that would be a lot less. And the state do cover their expert fees for coming in and consulting with me. I talk to them prior to going to court and discuss the case, go over their questions for trial, and review the records so they will be prepared for court. I don't put my witnesses on the stand cold. I always go over everything with them prior to a trial, so they wouldn't have to worry about that.
That's comforting. So who should they call? Give your number or a number they can call if they are listening today and they'd like to participate as a medical professional in the program.
My number is 910-592-4200, extension 3318. And I would like to add too,
Please.
if I can brag on my multidisciplinary team, and I hope Arnita don't mind me saying this, but I would say in the 4 years that we have been reviewing these cases, I can count on one hand the amount of cases that actually go to trial. I think our team does such a great job at working together and building the evidence for the case before charges are even filed. By the time those charges are filed, that person typically meets with Arnita and takes a plea.
Yeah.
That's true.
More so than the case actually going to court. So
For that doctor that's listening, he or she may say, well, basically what they need me for is for the evidential gathering piece, for you, Arnita, to say, here's what we have evidence-wise. And the other concern with the conversation about this, because I can see this question coming back, I can see an email now, but the question's going to come back, well, if you've only got so many docs, and you just indicated we don't have one local, and you're looking at bruises and those kinds of things, and typically I would assume that may be part of that. If you don't have that looked at, it kind of goes away after a while, doesn't it? And I mean, the scars may be not as intense. How do you deal with that?
the emergency room will help us out with that.
They process them.
Right,
Okay.
right. If there are things that the child needs to be seen for immediately, which a lot of times in physical abuse cases that happens, sometimes sexual abuse, but generally there's no evidence in sexual abuse cases, we will send them to the emergency room to be seen, and then they'll follow up with our medical doctor who has been trained to deal with those. Also, Department of Social Services and law enforcement will take pictures and have evidence of those initial findings.
It's similar to domestic abuse in the evidential part of gathering that information initially. Obviously, it's a whole different direction of travel. So we talked a bit about the physical abuse. What are some of the more predominant things that you see without, well, you can get as graphic as you want because we're not going to be showing any pictures, but what are some of the more predominant things you see as it relates to physical abuse with children? And let's help me draw a line for folks. So, because we've got a large number of folks that will argue the point. Of course, there's data out there that talks about striking a child is not good. And of course, there's people that say, look, you got to do that. That's what's wrong with society today. So help us understand what's physical abuse and what's disciplinary when it comes to children.
What we look at is bruises and lasting bruises. That's what we look at. And that's for more of a misdemeanor child abuse. That's the smallest charge for that type of thing. And it's not going to be lasting bruises. Sometimes whenever those type cases come to a report to DSS, sometimes they might not pursue charges or even adjudicate the case. They might put parenting classes in place and things such as that. It might not even get to the level where it would get to court. But the first initial thing we look at for the smallest thing is the bruises about the body and where those bruises are. You know, because kids, they fall, they do these things, and usually if they're falling, you have like the shin area that's bruised. But we're looking at the buttocks, where these bruises are very important. If it's near critical organs and things like that, not just on the butt, but if you have a child that's bruised across the chest and the stomach or something like that, we're going to take that a little bit more serious than the spanking on the buttocks. We put those in two different categories.
And Shannon, I do think that there's a lack of real conversation about disciplinary action and things that are actually illegal issues when it comes to children and what you can and can't do with children. And to that point, I think there's probably also one of the reasons that a lot of folks maybe don't report things. I mean, whether it's in a grocery store or whether it's in a shopping mall, particularly at Christmas time, and everybody's busy and you see a child running along behind a mother and the child's bouncing along about every 10 feet hitting the floor, and you want to say, really? You know, what is the issue? So that's, if we could kind of clear the air for folks on that and let them know they're not going to be prosecuted if they call in. I mean, if you don't know, it's better to call, correct?
I did a training recently on sexting to the social workers and school counselors and the principals, and my big message to them was, let the experts decide. You report, we get to decide whether it's abuse or not. We just need, if you see something and it doesn't seem right, you call in, you report it, and we'll do the investigation. And that's what people need to understand, because there is this mandatory reporting. And God forbid if you saw something and something happened to that child, that would be, I just wouldn't want that on my conscience. And we end up being able to prove that you knew this but didn't report it, you can be prosecuted for failing to report. And so I don't think nobody wants to be in that situation. I don't want to put some ordinary, normally law-abiding citizen in that situation, but that's how serious it is. You should just report and let us do our job and decide whether it's abuse or not.
And under that umbrella of abuse, there's one that is referred to as behavior modification, that in attempts to modify children's behavior in certain core ways, requiring children to do certain things that is just bizarre. Some of them I don't even want to put in my head, but it's just really strange. I can't believe, when you look at some of these kinds of things like that, and then the sexual abuse piece, and then the emotional abuse piece, all of those have some overlap, but some of them are so severe until, I don't know, Shannon, for both of you, I'd look at you and go, sometimes at night you just wake up and go, God, I hope that's not going on somewhere.
And I think one big thing with the behavior modification piece that you're talking about is public shaming. I think that's a big one that people are doing a lot more is with social media and public shaming of their children, which is inappropriate to do that. And
teachers pick up on that a lot too, I think, because they see that reflected then in the classroom. Do you think that there's a way that, you know, with this show, trying to educate folks on it, and they can call your number? We're going to script that at the bottom of the screen as well. But that if folks call, can you go out and talk to church groups and different groups and let them know?
Absolutely. I will talk to anybody that will listen. So any group that wants me to come out and give a presentation and talk about child abuse and what that looks like here in Sampson County and different laws and things around that, we can do that.
We're going to take a break. We're coming up on our last segment. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, so we'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. We've got a lot of information we want to give you about child abuse and neglect right here in the area. Stay tuned. Call a friend. We'll be back in a moment.
What? How can that be? The way someone broke in and stole my TV. Unless I want to install steel bars, I'll call the experts in security. Star Communications is the one that I can trust to get the job done.
Yeah, the only thing worse than that is not feeling safe in your own home or business.
Call Star Communications now. We're your local security experts, from alarms and monitoring to automation and personal protection.
Word.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking about child abuse and neglect today. We've covered a lot of information for you, and we've got a lot of information to cover. This is our last segment. I want to make sure that we cue in on some critical points that you need to know before we leave. And we're talking with Arnetha Gillis, who is the Assistant District Attorney, that basically you're part of the team, Arnetha, that works through the DA's office to handle child abuse cases. If it's a child abuse related kind of thing, you're somewhere in the middle of that.
That's correct.
Shannon, of course, you are all over it because you were one that, out of your passion, and I won't even get into how many hours the state and county owes you for volunteer work because you really pulled this thing together and made it happen. And 78 of these centers are in the state now that are focused on this, and we're fortunate to have one here. Give us the number again, your contact number, if somebody needs to contact you, and a contact number that if they need to call in a problem issue that they see?
Okay. My office is actually located in the Department of Social Services temporarily. That's where we are. And so the number to Department of Social Services is 910-592-4200. And they can call that number if they need to make a report of child abuse. If they need to speak with me at the Child Advocacy Center, my extension is 3318.
District Attorney's Office, 592-5143?
It's 596.
596.
6610.
596-6610. Now, when will they call you? I don't know whose number I just gave out, but it's...
That's the main office.
Oh, okay, so I was close. Okay.
Typically, the people who call me would be victims of people already charged, that are already in the system. And I encourage people to send back their victim impact statements, which is documentation that we send out to each and every case that comes through on a felony level. We send that information out, and they really need to send that back and fill that out, because that's how we make contact with them and keep them abreast of the case.
Okay, we said when we come back from break, there's a couple of things we wanted to do, and I want to make sure we cover what's going on in April, because you got a lot of things happening in April, the pinwheels thing and various things happening with your area. One of the key issues, again, for folks that are out there, it says, well, little Johnny said an ugly word, so I'm going to spank him. Nobody's going to get prosecuted if they spank someone, but where the line I'm hearing you say, Arnitha, is drawn is when there are abrasions, bruises, actual documented physical injury. With that said, Shannon, there's been a lot of work, as you know, done on something called toxic stress in children. And I particularly was looking at this study called a ACE study, and it studied the adverse childhood experiences that people had and how it reflected into their adulthood. How important it is for us as adults today, with our little handheld devices and with all of our other distractions, to not pay attention to their children, and what impact does that have in future societies? Oh, that's deep. You can just swim anywhere you want to in there. But I'm telling you, that just blew me away, because it talked about all kinds of disorders from heart, lung, liver, obesity, diabetes, depression, all of these kinds of things. This study, and I'll be glad to give the folks the information on it, but it was a scientific study that was done, and it was done by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. And it was really, it was just astounding, because it causes you and our listeners to look back and go, what did happen in my childhood that now has some effect on my life?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times with that study, you have to just take the time to just talk to your child. I had a recent case where I looked at this video, I can't give any names, but I've looked at so many cases where I've seen tons of video of family interactions and a mother never telling her son that she loved him. And I've seen, many days that they recorded, and that was shocking to me. That was more so than the environment, that this kid did not feel loved. I think parents should just sometimes put those phones down, turn the TV off, and just talk to your family. Play board games. Let your kid know that they're important. Mm-hmm. And I have a rule in my house that once I get home, it's family time. I don't answer my phone. During dinner, I'm very strict about that in my household. And I think, people need to have that rule so their kids can come in and they can talk to you. Because if something's happening in your child's life and they feel comfortable talking to you, you're going to be the first person they tell. If there's something happening at school, if there's bullies, abuse, those type things, if you have that relationship, you build that relationship, I think that your kid will come and talk to you about those issues.
Yes, Shannon, that's a good point that Arnitha's bringing up. I dare say there's probably a kitchen table in most every home in the area and that hears this show in the 8 or 10 counties. But the question is, how much do you use the kitchen table for what you just pointed out? I think that's pretty profound when you think about it. Is that something that maybe we that would be a recommendation to folks to maybe have that. We set time aside for everything else.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, some of my best memories are sitting around the kitchen table with family, and that's when you do talk and open up. And my children are the same way. I'm with Arnitha on that. Is when we sit down at the kitchen table, that's time that nothing else interrupts, and we have table talk and we talk about different things that's going on. I see a lot of children that when I talk with the family or the parents before I talk to the child, the parent sometimes says, I don't think this happened. If this really happened, she would have come and told me this. When I talk to the child, the mama sometimes, or the daddy, maybe the last person they would go and say this to, because they feel like they can't talk to them, or even how you react when your child tries to talk to you and tell you things. Children aren't talking to their families, and I think the electronic devices and social media, people get so wrapped up in that and they're not spending time with their kids.
I really think you've hit on a very key point, and part of one of these studies looks at a lot of that and the extended behavioral issues. And when you see a lot of stuff going on in society now, I don't, between social services and the district attorney's office, they probably see more of the perverse things happening in society than anybody else. You go to any district you want to in the country. And we see a lot of this going on, and some of it can be traced back to a toxic kind of environment, or what they believe to be that child is kind of branded in that behavioral mode, and domestic violence is another situation if they're exposed to that.
So, but drugs and alcohol.
That plays a huge factor into it. But and I think we're seeing, and Arnitha and I were talking about this before we came on air, the whole issue of, is it a criminal issue, arrested away, or is it a cognitive issue to deal with the addiction side, which both is important. I want to take time right now to make sure we cover all of these things you've got coming up, and you have got April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Let's just start and go down the list, and I'll let you run with it. But 950 children that you guys have looked at in 2015, that's a lot of folks. I mean, if you divide that by 12,
it is a lot.
Yeah, you need some help. You need some help.
So that was the Department of Social Services number, was the 950. The Child Advocacy Center, we saw 125 children, which those were severe cases. If they come to the Child Advocacy Center, it's severe.
That's over the edge.
Right. They're definitely, where Arnitha spoke about earlier, sometimes criminal is involved, sometimes it's not. Sometimes DSS puts services in place for families. This 125, there's generally criminal is always involved in those.
The sound alarm thing, let's talk about that. I was really impressed with this because you've kind of involved everybody in that.
We're excited about Sound the Alarm. That's on April the 8th. It's a new thing we have never done in this county. We're looking forward to that. But we ask everybody, every organization, school, community group, wherever you are, in your car, at home, to sound the alarm, to actually set off school bells, your alarm in your organizations, car horns, whistles, sirens, whatever you can at 10 o'clock on April the 8th for 30 seconds. And that is just letting everybody know you're standing up for child abuse in this county. And then following that, we ask for 30 seconds of silence to remember those that have been abused in this county.
And it's a good way to kind of galvanize that. I mean, and so when folks hear a noise, somebody blowing a horn, or police car goes by, maybe and taps a siren, or whatever it may be, or even maybe you could challenge the fire departments to make we might be violating the law here or something. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, Arnitha, I don't know whether we're doing that or not, but make a noise of some kind would be helpful.
Right.
Okay, then the 24th of April, you got Blue Sunday.
The 24th of April is Blue Sunday. That's a nationally recognized day that is set aside in the faith-based community for them to recognize child abuse prevention and educate in their churches about that. I've had churches that have invited guest speakers in for that day. I've had churches to give out blue ribbons, which is the color for child abuse prevention. So we just ask that all churches participate on Blue Sunday by doing something in your service related to that. If it's praying for the children that have been abused, or praying for the people that work these cases.
And I'm going to give the number out, 592-4200. That's 910-592-4200, extension 3318. They can reach you. And Arnitha, you give your number again, because I gave them the central numbers.
Oh, that's 596-6610, and they can call to the DA's office And like I said, very important for victims to return those victim impact statements in these very serious cases.
And we're going to put these numbers at the bottom of the screen for our TV viewers, so they'll know that. And I want to invite you back anytime we need to touch on something, because as you know, Shannon, you've been on before, there's so much information. This is kind of like one of those semester courses, aren't it, that we need to just really educate people more and more, because I think it's a growing problem, and it does reflect, according to the ACE study, it does reflect in the future. So thank you for being with us today and taking time to be here. I know you're both very busy ladies, but we really appreciate what you do in the community and how you're reaching out and helping, and hopefully folks will feel more comfortable in giving you a call. Okay?
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate you each and every Tuesday. Thank you for your comments and commentary on weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing you again next week on the radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.